Hello everybody, this is Joe from the Jodo cast, and the Shatterpoint core rulebook is out. And I'm not going to go through everything in the rulebook because we already know a lot about it from our demos, but I wanted to share with you the top 10 things I found in the rulebook that stood out to me as interesting or noteworthy that I wanted to share with you. First thing up is the terrain guidance in the rulebook as far as how to set up your terrain on your table is sort of just kind of go for it. On page 18 of the rulebook, we have this paragraph which says, the battlefield must contain a mix of terrain features of various shapes and sizes. Terrain features should be predominantly placed in the central area of the battlefield, but players should attempt to create visually interesting environments for characters to explore, climb, jump on, and traverse throughout the game. Players are encouraged to fill the majority of the battlefield with terrain features of varying elevations, which works for me. I think some people were hoping for some more precise rules on how to provide terrain, like, oh, you need to make sure it occupies at least 3/4 exactly of the board or whatever. But this paragraph is basically just says, go for it. Just do whatever. Make sure, as long as it looks cool and is, varied in type, that's good enough. Number 2 on my list is another item on the same page. Just the next paragraph down. The battlefield is created after the mission is chosen and objective tokens are placed. When you're setting up the game, you pick your mission, you put the objective tokens on the table, then you put all the terrain on the table. In their example here, the token was already on the table, then they put this little gantry here, which means you raise the tokens to the highest point of the elevation. I'm not sure exactly why. I guess just convenience. It's probably easier to measure the distances between all the objective tokens before you've put anything on the board. Deployment happens in squads. So unlike other games like Legion, you don't take turns putting down individual units. You take turns putting down squads. And remember, a squad consists of a primary unit, a secondary unit, and a support unit. So first player puts down one squad, so 3 units, and then the second player puts down a squad, and so forth. So you're not... deployment should go pretty quick because there's only ever going to be 4 squads total in a game. Number 4, your force pool, aka the will of the force, the tokens you have that you generated at the start of the game and use to pay for your abilities. That refreshes when you refresh your order deck. So if you ever get through all the cards in your order deck, you refresh your order deck by shuffling them all back together, and that's when all of your force tokens come back. If you ever wish you had some more force tokens, you only get them back when you reshuffle your order deck, which is to say, after you've gone through all of your characters at least once. Number 5. Climb and jump are exactly the same thing. The text under jump and the text under climb are identical. The only difference is that you can't climb if you're engaged. You can jump out of an engagement, you can't climb out of an engagement. Number 6. When you advance or dash, which is a short move or a long move, you can go down any number of elevations. So if you were on top of, the Grand Canyon, you could advance and end up at the bottom of it. You can't go from bottom to top. That would require a climb or a jump, but you can go top to bottom. So essentially, you can just run off of things and there's no fall damage or any penalty for that. Number 7, the rules for push and pull. That is to say, when you push something away from you or pull something towards you, there's a lot of bullets here explaining when something can't be pushed or pulled, and honestly, it's a little hard to get my head around, but basically it seems like it always stops the push or the pull if it runs into the edge of something or bumps into something like a character. More importantly, it appears you could not pull somebody over a ledge or push somebody up onto a ledge. Once they reach that barrier, that's when the push and the pull stops. Number 8. Bases are not allowed to overhang terrain features. We have this rule in Legion right now, and it appears to be the same in Shatterpoint. Your base must be completely 100% overlapping the terrain. So if we look in this example here, Gar-Saxon is trying to move down towards closer to Anakin, and he's overlapping. He can't do that. He's got to back up a little bit. We've got another example here where Anakin Skywalker pushes Count Dooku. He could push him up to 1 away, which is this far, but his base is overhanging, so he's got to come closer. So every bit of his base is overlapping and nothing is overhanging. So there can never be any base overhang in Shatterpoint. Number 9, the difference between injured and wounded. There's a couple steps to how a character is defeated. You've got damage, which is their, oh god, what is it called? Stamina? Stamina. Stamina is the little Star Wars version of the Red Cross. So you get damage up until your stamina. At the point where you have equal numbers, so in this example, Bo-Katan has 8, you immediately become wounded, which is this little heartbeat token. Once you start an activation wounded, you flip the wounded over, which becomes injured, and then you clear all of your damage and remove a condition. So the difference between injured and wounded, which, you know, sound like very similar things. Wounded is basically like a timeout. Okay, guys, you got me. Because when you're wounded, you could keep getting more damage, but all of that damage is going to go away when you start your activation and flip to injured. When you're wounded, you can't be engaged with people, or if you are, you don't prevent them from climbing and doing other things. When you're wounded, you don't count towards objectives. Basically, being wounded is just like a, hey, you can't really hurt me, but also I'm not contributing to my team. Then they get injured and they're basically back to normal, so to speak. And then once you've gotten 2 injuries at the end of an activation where you have, or your maximum number of injuries, that's when you would die. So wounded is basically like a sort of a timeout, I'm good for nothing turn, and injured is just a way to track your total, how close am I to being defeated. Number 10. If you gain a condition you already have, you take a damage. Some games you might assume that, oh, you already have a strained, so I can't give you another one. Well, you can't double up, but if you would get one you already have, that's a damage, so it's still worth your time to try and apply conditions to units that might already have that condition. And finally, let's look at line of sight and cover. Line of sight is a huge paragraph that might be just one sentence. Let's read this through. A character has line of sight to an object if a straight, unobstructed line can be drawn from any part of that character's base to the object. Okay, we got one sentence. Basically, just draw a line from the attacker to the defender. If you got a line, you can see him. Now, obviously, there's conditions for that. The line can, I suppose, is allowed to pass unobstructed through characters. Okay, so you can see through characters. Any clear terrain parts. Clear is types of terrain that you have determined can be seen through, like a ladder. Any blocked terrain parts that the character is overlapping. Okay, so the one doing the looking, if you're overlapping a blocked terrain, like a building, you can still draw your line through that. And any blocked terrain parts with the same or lower elevation than that character. Okay, so any other blocked terrain that is at the same height or lower than what the attacker is standing on, you can still draw your line through that. Okay? The line cannot pass through blocked terrain features with a higher elevation than the character if the object, I think in this case the object is what we're trying to see, is on top of a terrain part. The line can pass unobstructed through all terrain parts with the same or lower elevation as the object. Let's look at the example, because I think this is a bad example. When drawing line of sight, characters may always ignore clear terrain parts regardless of the part's elevation. So in this case, basically we can see through the ladder. So let's try and follow the rules and see if Ahsoka can see Gar-Saxon and vice versa. Ahsoka, we can draw a line between them. We are allowed to ignore the thing she is standing on because it is a blocked terrain that the character is overlapping. And the ladder is clear, So yes, Ahsoka can see Gar Saxon. Now, Gar Saxon, if we draw this line, it is going to go through the ladder, which is clear, so we can go through the ladder. It's also going to go through this blocked terrain that is higher than Gar Saxon. So the line cannot pass through blocked terrain features with a higher elevation than that character. So this is a blocked terrain piece that has a higher elevation than Gar Saxon. We know the terrain pieces are all slightly higher than range 2, which is an elevation band is range 2. So by this, I would assume Gar Saxon cannot see Ahsoka because she is taller. But let's keep reading. If the object, I believe in this case the object is Ahsoka, is on top of a terrain part, she is, the line can pass unobstructed through all terrain parts with the same or lower elevation as the object. So it can pass through this building because the building is the same height as her. So the line can pass unobstructed through all terrain parts of this. So the line could pass through this. So they do have line of sight. This seems to contradict the previous one where it says cannot pass through blocked terrain feature with higher elevation than the character. These two lines are kind of contradictory to me, and I don't quite understand. I would assume he could see her because logically it looks like he should be able to. So now let's look at cover. And this one is also interesting. If you have cover, you just get an extra die on defense. So in order to get cover, the defending character has to be within range 1 of one or more terrain parts at the same or higher elevation than the attacking character. So basically you just got to be near a thing, not lower than the attacker. Okay. Also, a straight line can be drawn from any portion of the attacking character's base to any portion of the defending character's base through any number of those terrain parts. So now so if we can draw a line between the two and we can draw a line that passes through one of those terrain parts, and they have to be making a ranged attack. So in this case, I think if Gar Saxon were shooting at Ahsoka, she would have cover because that line would go through this. But let me give you a situation here. What if Ahsoka were standing right in front of these boxes? Now let's see. The defending character must be within range 1 of one or more terrain parts the same height or elevation of the attacker. Okay, so that is being met. She is at range, if she's standing right in front of this box, she's at range 1 of the box, which is at Gar Saxon's height. A straight line can be drawn from any portion of the attacking character's base to any portion of the defending character's base, yes, through any number of those terrain parts. Now, let me ask you, does any number include 0? It doesn't say at least 1. 0 is a number, if you ask me. I went to some school. So it's obviously not meant to be that way, but that's the way it looks like it's written to me, that any number could include 0, because otherwise why wouldn't they just say at least 1 of those terrain parts? So my argument is if Ahsoka was standing within range 1 of these boxes, she would have cover, even if 0 lines between the attacker pass through that. Obviously that is silly and dumb, but that's what I'm saying here. Well, that is the 10 things I found in the rulebook that I found to be interesting and wanted to bring up with all of you. Please leave your comments on everything that I just said, but also if you found anything else that you thought was particularly interesting or noteworthy from the rulebook. There's a lot to digest here, and these were just the 10 things that stood out to me the most. Thanks everybody for watching. Until next time.